Hi there. Thanks for joining me for tea. Today, I'm having a nice sencha green tea. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the first Doctor's portrayals, especially his portrayals after William Hartnell passed. So I started watching Doctor Who when I was about 14 or 15, and back then it was on my PBS channel, and they were only showing Doctors 4 through 7. So I started at the Android Invasion with Doctor number 4, watched through 7, and by the time I had finished, they announced that for the first time on our PBS channel, they were going to have all the Doctors 1 through 7. It was a big special event. So every Saturday night, I was ready for Doctor Who. I was determined I was going to watch them all the way through. I didn't know what to expect out of the earlier Doctors. And not to show my age, but back then, the internet was pretty new, and you couldn't really just get on and Google Doctor Who and see who all the doctors were and all of that. So I didn't know who the actors were. I didn't even know what they looked like. So all of it was pretty new and exciting. So I tuned in for the first episode, An Unearthly Child, and of course the first Doctor. If you've seen the episode, you'll know that he does start off kind of grumpy, kind of crotchety. Ian and Barbara, they're school teachers, and their student Susan Foreman, is kind of strange. And they wonder, like, why is she so intelligent but also so naive about certain things? And this grandfather of hers sounds very weird, and Barbara becomes concerned about her and wants to go and talk to her grandfather. So she and Ian follow her home one night, and her address leads to an old junkyard. And she goes in, and they're worried about her, so they follow her in. And as they're looking for her, they bump into the first Doctor. And they hear her voice coming out of this old police box, and they think he has her locked in there. So, of course, they push their way in to find that it's bigger on the inside than the outside. And we see the TARDIS for the first time. And of course, the Doctor is very unhappy. It starts with all the mystery of who is this man, and who is his granddaughter? Where does he come from? What is this? What is this thing, this TARDIS? Of course, Barbara and Ian don't believe him. So kind of to prove to them that he isn't lying or crazy, he takes off. And they end up in the past. And that's where we have the start of the caveman episode, essentially. So, yes, through that episode, he doesn't want Ian and Barbara there. He doesn't trust them. He doesn't like them. And, they pushed their way onto his ship. And he is rather grumpy. So then we move into the Daleks. And of course, the Daleks is absolutely fabulous. What do you think of the Daleks? And what do you think of An Unearthly Child? I actually enjoy An Unearthly Child because it starts all of the mystery and, introduces us to a lot of new things. It also shows us some of the characters and what their personalities are. And it starts the Doctor a certain way, but then he goes through a character arc, which I think is really good and important. So the Daleks, they still don't trust each other, don't like each other, but they're separated a lot through the episodes. They do work together, so it's not quite as head-butting as the relationship is in the first one. Edge of Destruction. There's a lot of weird stuff happening in the TARDIS, and the Doctor can't figure out what's going on. So he starts to blame Barbara and Ian. And at one point, he threatens to throw them off the ship, which would essentially just be a death sentence for them. Of course, this doesn't happen, and Barbara ends up putting all these clues together, putting all these weird things together that are happening, and she's the one who is trying to figure things out and putting these clues and hints together that helps the Doctor to discover what has happened to his ship. By the end of that episode, we find the Doctor, I think, much happier, actually. He feels really bad for how he treated Ian, especially Barbara, because Barbara takes it so badly, of course. I mean, I think I would too if he was about to push me off the TARDIS. I don't think I'd be very, nice about that either. Um, so he apologizes to her. He tells her how good her intuition was and how smart she is and how she's such a valuable person to have with him. And they leave the TARDIS arm in arm. And this is where you really see him change. He realizes that Barbara and Ian have their uses. They're both very good, very nice people. Of course, Ian is intelligent. He's a science teacher, but also he is kind of an action guy. And Barbara can definitely be actiony when she needs to, although she's not what I would call like an action character. But she has her moments, we'll say that. But she is also really smart and good at figuring things out. And I think he really comes to rely on both of them. And I don't think he sees them necessarily like he sees Susan, but he is also protective of them. And of course, they gripe sometimes and they argue sometimes. But generally speaking, they really value each other. And this relationship grows as they're there. So I think it's a wonderful character arc for the Doctor. So if we look at the portrayals of the first Doctor in more modern media, because that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. At first, I just want to give you a little background about how I see the first Doctor and his character and his growth. So we can look at the three Doctors, though I don't really feel like it's that relevant. William Hartnell was still alive, of course, and from what I understand, he was not very well at the time, unfortunately. So when they asked him to do the three Doctors, he wanted to do it. But the reason they have him, stuck in that little thing and he can't really physically be there and interact with people is because he was too unwell to do that. But they had him in the show and he gives a lot of valuable information. He's still, very intelligent and he's a little crotchety, especially with his, new selves. That's just kind of Doctor Who. I mean, all of them sort of make fun of themselves. But I always think that's kind of all in good fun. So, but overall, he's not in it a lot, but I think it's still well done. And I was glad to see William Hartnell again in the part. But if we move on to the five Doctors, because I think this is really where it starts, it almost seems like when they wrote the five Doctors, they wrote in the first Doctor maybe the way that he was at the beginning of An Unearthly Child. But they also did some things that I didn't really see the first Doctor doing a lot. The portrayal, he's very grumpy in the Five Doctors. And I feel like that's kind of not the point. Like the grumpy Doctor was only in the first 2 or 3 episodes, and then he definitely changes. He goes through his character arc. So I don't feel like that was a good point to make the Doctor so grumpy in that. Also, they make him rather sexist, which if you watch through the first Doctor, I don't feel like the first Doctor is sexist. And yes, the first Doctor was in the 60s. It was a different time. Some of the characters in different episodes will say, "Oh, I want to do this," and they're like, "No, you wait here." And then the woman character's like, "Oh, is it because I'm a woman? Like I can still do these things too." But I actually think that's kind of progressive because I feel like they're showing in those instances that no, maybe I'm a woman, but I can still do these things, right? But I didn't see the first Doctor doing a lot of that. Now he did, ask Susan to fetch him things or all of that. But Susan, was his granddaughter. And I don't think that that's sexist. I think that haven't we all been asked by our grandparents to, get something for them or make something for everybody or, even our parents, right? Hey, can you fetch me a cup of coffee or make some, tea or whatever? So I feel like that's pretty common, pretty typical grandfather-granddaughter interaction. I don't feel like that was sexist. And he wasn't doing that to Barbara. So just because he was doing this to Susan doesn't mean that he was doing this to other characters in the show. So I feel like his portrayal in the Five Doctors is not the best. And I was disappointed by that, especially after I had the chance to watch, through from the first through the seventh, and really fell in love with a lot of the first Doctor episodes and the characters. It was rather disappointing. It's still fun. I mean, it's still a fun episode. You get to see mostly the five Doctors together, except the fourth, kind of not really there. Still, it's fun to see some of the previous companions and everything. So, while I don't feel like it's the strongest episode for many reasons, it's still fun. So, it is what it is. So let's move a little more forward into time, to Twice Upon a Time. And in this one, we have another new actor playing the first Doctor. And it's the same actor who played him in the Adventures in Time and Space. Now, I really enjoyed Adventures in Time and Space. I thought that the actor who played the first Doctor did a wonderful job. I felt like the writing was terrific. I mean, it really honored both William Hartnell and the first Doctor, because the first Doctor, after all, I mean, we wouldn't have Doctor Who without the first Doctor. So I think it's important to, give them credit for that. I never really got into new Doctor Who. That's why I just do classic Doctor Who stuff. Though I have tuned in here and there, it just never really drew me in the same way the old show did. So, and that's fine. I know lots of people love it, and I'm sure there are some wonderful episodes. I just never really got into it. But I have tuned in for specials, and I tuned in for this one specifically because I like the first Doctor a lot. And I was very excited to see him again, especially with this actor who was in The Adventures in Time and Space. So I settled in, I was excited, and yet again, it seems like the writer watched maybe the five Doctors, maybe a few moments from the first episode, maybe a few moments kind of spread here and there, taken out of context, and based the character of the first Doctor on that. And I was so disappointed because he was just so much worse even than in the five Doctors. He was sexist. He was just, frankly, just a horrible person. And I don't agree with that portrayal. And if you've seen the first Doctor episodes, what do you think? Was that a fair portrayal of the first Doctor? Because I really didn't feel like it was. And, there were some lines that, yes, maybe the first Doctor said them in the classic Doctor Who. Like, he told Susan in Dalek Invasion of Earth that he was going to give her a good smack bottom or whatever it was. And that's, again, she did something kind of silly, and the Doctor said that to her because that's his granddaughter. And I know that's still kind of old-fashioned anyway, because a lot of parents, don't agree with with doing that to their children. So yeah, even that line can be a little old-fashioned, even concerning his granddaughter. But he doesn't just say that to his female companions. He doesn't roam around, threatening to spank, Barbara and Polly and whoever. So that just didn't happen. Yeah, I had a little bit of a problem with that. But also in the Dalek Invasion of Earth, for anyone who's seen it, you have to understand that part of the point of that episode was letting Susan grow up. So they emphasized her, at least the way that her grandfather saw her, as a child. And I think that line especially was to show that, he still viewed her as a child. But by the end of the episode, he even says to her, that he realizes that she's a woman and he has to let her go. So I think that line had a very specific point to make about that. Anyway, I was disappointed, unfortunately, with Twice Upon a Time, and mainly because of the portrayal of the first Doctor. I don't think that it's good to rewrite history, essentially, because the Doctor, and Doctor Who in general, I believe, has always been progressive. And I feel like the character of the Doctor has always fought for what was good and what was right. And I mean, the Daleks, the first Doctor, the first one to fight the Daleks, who are essentially space Nazis. So I feel like they're just not doing the first Doctor justice, the writers justice, the actor justice. And Doctor Who, I used to watch the old Star Trek as well when I was a little younger, even than a teenager. And my big complaint with it, even when I was, a tween, was that the portrayal of women was just absolutely horrid, really. It was like women were just something to drool over, to kiss, to look at. Women weren't really that important a lot of times. I mean, sometimes they played an important role, but we still had to have all these scenes where like the men just couldn't take their eyes off of them and they were drooling all over them. And I was just like, wow, that's terrible. And Doctor Who didn't do that. I think Barbara is a very strong character, and I think the Doctor respects her for her strengths. And I feel like it started out strong like that. Not every character was like that. That's true. There were some screamers in there, not as many as a lot of people think, but it happened here and there, especially with later Doctors. But overall, I think Doctor Who has always been a show that has portrayed women in a pretty good way, especially considering the time in which it was written. I think they did a fabulous job. And I mean, I've shown my son the old Doctor Who. I have no problem with him, seeing the way women were portrayed, especially, looking at Barbara and some of the other strong women, as we go through Zoe, who's extremely intelligent, and Sarah Jane Smith. And so anyway, that's my opinion on it. I would love to hear what you think. Have the portrayals of the first Doctor been true to him, or have they been maybe rewriting history a little bit, something the Doctor would not approve of? So let me know, and I hope you've enjoyed this little discussion. And hopefully at some point my little cat will join us, because she looks just like the survival cats. So I really want to show everybody, but she didn't join me today. Maybe next time. So hope you have a good one. Bye-bye.